welcome back to the class, everyone. When it comes down to building your roster and your farming plan for what characters you want, it's very nice to know where the teams rank in relation to each other as far as their overall GAC viability. One of the issues with my ranking, though, over the last couple years is consistently always included conquest characters. And while they're great and they typically lean towards the higher end of the teams, they're also really hard to farm. So in today's video, we want to address the question, what do the best teams look like if we're not getting conquest characters at all? Now, after that very wordy intro, this is how we are going to do this. We've done this type of video before where we take every single character in the game, we group them into teams, and then rank them from worst to best in different categories. Now, with that being said, we typically exclude Galactic Legends because we all know that they're the best, and then in addition to that, they're also very hard to farm. Now, in this video, as we already mentioned in the intro, we're going to be doing the exact same thing with conquest characters, purely because when you go out to building a farming plan, it's hard to plan them into it because they are available primarily in Proving Grounds a year after their conquest comes out, and then even when you get to that point, it becomes very difficult to farm them because you have to A, beat the event, wait several months, or pay through the nose for crystals. The only other places that they're really available are in a few select shops where the currency is very sparse, and even a lot of the newer characters aren't in those stores to begin with. So without further ado, we are going to be talking about the 4 S-tier teams that would exist if conquest characters weren't a thing if you didn't have access to them. And the main thing that is going to describe this tier is the fact that they are going to consistently and constantly challenge Galactic Legends, whether on offense or on defense. And I realize we're including Bo-Katan Mandalore here, despite the fact that she is a difficult to obtain character, but she's at least farmable right now. Her event comes back every single month. Every single one of the characters on her team can be farmed on nodes, with the exclusion of Beskar Mando, who's a legendary, who all his characters are on nodes too. So the reason why she's here is because they consistently take down Lord Vader even without the Datacron. We had a pretty sufficient data to prove that before her Datacron went away, but what continues to be the case after. Starkiller is still beating the vast majority of raids out there outside of Kyber 1 and Kyber 2, where raid typically has a fun Datacron and or new character to play with. Inquisitors are quite frankly monsters with or without. On Omicron, they have the ability to take down a lot of those Jedi Galactic Legend teams and just a lot of high level teams in general. And then we are actually going to be adding the Sith trio or quintumvirate here with Savage, Oppresses, Omicron. And the reason why they're fitting into this higher level tier with the like of the Inquisitors is because while they don't typically destroy Galactic Legends every single round on offense, there are a few niche scenarios where they can do that. They are a pain to beat on defense. There really isn't that great of a counter that doesn't rely on a Datacron that or isn't a Galactic Legend. The best one out there is the Gidme counter, and even then very few people are aware of it or already using both Gideon or Padme in different teams to great effect, making this team very challenging to take down. We kind of have this running joke right now on our streams that we can consistently leave it on defense, and then I go into my history and check, and then it gets beat by Sith Eternal all 3 times, which is great because now they can't use Sith Eternal to beat the vast majority of the rest of my team. So these are really the best teams when we cut out conquest characters as a whole. Now, next up is the A tier. So all these are very good teams that we would ideally like to have farmed, and they don't include, again, conquest characters. So Seer is actually going to land herself in this category because she does not have the help of Malicos. And this is actually still really good. The team is fantastic, especially when you have Seer's Omicron attached. This helps cut out really kind of cheaper counters like Bad Batch that could just come in and immediately daze and control the team. You have the Omicron in GAC, and all of a sudden they can no longer be dazed, and all this other really fun stuff happens. And while Malicos is obviously very good for damage, the team doesn't necessarily suffer from not having damage the second he gets cut out. We've all seen Fulcrum do some nasty things, and then on top of it, Seer herself has a pretty nice max health damage move that will just eventually one-shot characters that aren't immune to max health damage. The reason why we're using Kylo Ren instead of another character in the slot is because the AI should consistently use Lash Out, where he is going to be giving 25 or 50% turn meter over to our good friend Crew, who then can taunt and stun more consistently. Another great substitute for this would be Scavenger Ray, who I think we'll ultimately end up using in another JTR squad. But overall, not that important, but still a good team. Not quite beating Galactic Legends, but still a pain to deal with on defense because there aren't really all that many cheap counters out there. Gungans are also going to land in here, and this, we're going to have to take this with a grain of salt because the team is pretty much not existed at all, especially without their Datacron. We don't really know all that much what they can do. I have tested and played around with them a ton in Squad Arena, and I love the team. Big Phantom Menace fan, if you couldn't tell that from several other videos that we've made, but the team really struggles offensively. The shield generator and all the debuffs that the team has give it great control and great survivability. But ultimately, once the enemy team can get access to the shield generator and knock it out, the team pretty much just falls apart into shambles. Now, I will say, in defense of the Gungans, I'm also only using Relic 5 Bombardier and Captain Tarpals, so to blame the team for me not having the damage I need to beat Galactic Legends, maybe that's a me problem. Only time will tell. We'll find this out more over time. But right now, this is where we're putting them, and I really don't feel all that bad about it because they've always been marketed as the raid team to have for a raid that we currently don't have yet. So overall value probably still there, but from a GAC perspective, they're not going to land in the top category. They're going to land a little bit lower. Sith Empire is still quite frankly fantastic. They do suck on defense a little bit actually without Malgus on the team to help thwart things like Imperial Troopers that would just otherwise be a really easy counter. That being said, offensively, they're still a huge pain in the butt. Darth Revan's leadership, while it is not as good as Malgus's for the reasons we kind of listed before, it's still pretty good, and it offers one thing that Malgus's lead does not offer, and that is locked death mark on the enemy leader. This can be particularly very helpful when you're trying to fight things like Inquisitors or a really good Grievous team where death mark on the leader is pretty much game over for everyone. Next up is going to be the Phoenix team, and this is really what embodies the A-tier teams well, where they're not necessarily punching and beating up all the Galactic Legends consistently, but they do have an outside shot against a lot of these stronger teams out there when there isn't a Datacron doing something funny. The great example would be versus Inquisitors. Phoenix have a very good chance at beating them, especially when you add in a pre-taunt to make sure that Krex does not get tortured right off the bat. They also can do a lot of other things. That's kind of why they're in this higher tier. Next up is going to be the Knights Table, a rather expensive Jedi team. You don't always have to split up your Jedi this way. Maybe we'll do a video on that some point in the future. But if you do want to use this, it actually can be an outside counter to JMK. They just kind of have all the tools necessary between insta-kill, repost, whole team stun, mark, savior, revive, pretty much everything you could want and more the team is capable of doing, albeit a very expensive team. General Skywalker, I don't think I have to explain why this team is this high up. It, again, has outside shots at Galactic Legends and even has outside shots at the teams in this category right above it, so pretty much perfectly nails why it should be here. The Finn Zori team, anyone who's faced this team on defense know that it's one of the most annoying to go against. Once they get going, it's really hard to stop them. They have one of the best turn meter trains currently in game. They don't even necessarily need to be able to land exposes because Rose herself will guarantee it, whether or not they have potency or they're even supposed to land and expose in the first place because of her interaction with Zori's kid. CLS, again, another house name. We don't really have to explain why they're here. They have, an outside shot at beating a lot of teams, and especially, they have a wide range of factions, being Scoundrel, Smuggler, Wookiee, Resistance, Rebel itself, where they will pretty typically get a Datacron that'll help them beat stronger things like Jabba the Hutt. General Grievous, we kind of already talked about why they're here. Really good outside counter to Starkiller and some of the weaker Galactic Legends, or weaker Galactic Legend comps, I should say. And then Afra for having the outside shot against Jabba, and then just being overall a really helpful and useful tool, specifically for Galactic Legend cleanups. It's actually like the #1 counter for 6 out of the 8 or something like that. We did a video at that at one point that seems to have gotten quite a bit of attention. So Afra, definitely very good. B tier. Now these teams are still not definitely bad. Obviously, if you are in Kyber and Grand Arena, you won't even fill up your entire offense and defensive strategy if you just go with these two. You only have 14 teams. Realistically, you're going to need most of these teams or supplement them obviously with stronger Galactic Legends. Padme, I really feel bad about putting her this low for several reasons. Number one, her Datacron currently makes her significantly stronger to the point where she's beating some other Galactic Legends. In addition to that, this is also not the strongest version of this team. There are other ways to spice this up to help her kind of climb the ladder. Putting Gideon in there will help tremendously with that. If we were allowed to put Commander Ahsoka Tano in there, that would also be great because she can help, again, beat some of those bigger teams. But again, we're kind of going for the most normal vanilla S team here, and this is just kind of what we get. And it's not a bad team. It'll still punch up against a few of these other ones in the A tier, which kind of correctly defines what B tier is, occasionally punching up and beating the A tier. Saw is where he is because he kind of has a general defense mechanism to a lot of the normal anti-rebel teams like Iden and or Wampa, so this is just where they fall, being the better rebel fighter team out there, obviously falling short of both CLS and Leia. The Tuskens are up next. Very wildly specific synergy that they have. It's pretty good, but it's really isolated. They beat teams that get a lot of turn meter, and they don't beat teams that don't really get any turn meter at all. Bad Batch, overall, great counter to a lot of things. It is an expensive team, but they have the synergy necessary to beat most of the teams out there that just don't have generic immunities. We talked about that a little bit before with Seer. Once immediately she can stop her team from being dazed, Bad Batch falls apart, and unfortunately there's a lot of teams right now that fall into that category where all of a sudden everyone's immune to stun and daze, and Bad Batch really kind of suffered because of it. Wampa, overall amazing. I love him just because he is a one-man team, which makes it for a very low investment. He is already required for Jedi Knight Luke, so most people have him at a bare minimum of Relic 3 because of that, and bringing him to higher Relic levels is great because the amount of stat boost that he gets with his GAC Omicron just become more so because his base stats are naturally higher. Next up is going to be Qui-Gon Jinn. Fantastic team. I love it personally on offense because the AI doesn't, it's easy to control, I guess I should say. If you can make sure that Jedi Anakin is stunned or fractured or feared or even ability blocked, when Qui-Gon Jinn goes down, the team is not that hard to deal with. The great thing is, if you take him on offense, the AI doesn't really know what to do, and Jedi Anakin blowing up the entire enemy team is a very fun thing to watch. I remember before they had Qui-Gon Jinn's Omicron nerfed, we blew up most of the Lord Vader team one time before they exiled it away from Galactic Legends. Next up is going to be Iden. Iden is here because she beats pretty much all the consistently assisting out of turn teams like Mon Mothma or Geonosians. Kind of pigeonholed a little bit. The reason why she's here is because she can punch up against some of these stronger teams like CLS. Actually, CLS very specifically is a great example. Adrad is up next, a team that a lot of times looks at like a leftover team, maybe like a Phasma team, because really most people get this team because they got Profundity. It's not that. It is significantly better than a Phasma team. The amount of survivability the team has is great, and then also benefits from fighting bad AIs because they will love to try to kill Jinn when they literally can't because Admiral Raddus is still standing, which buys him enough time to get his ultimate ability where he'll pretty much just zap the entire enemy team. It's very fun to use. Next up is going to be Bounty Hunters. Overall, fantastic team. I like using Aura Lead for the instant contract. Boss Lead is superior if you have access to the weakest character, but a lot of teams out there either have stealth or pre-taunts or ways to interrupt that, or maybe you'll even jump around because of how they equalize. But overall, as long as you have Boss, Grief, Mando in there, that's pretty much the core of the team. Fennec is there for some nice damage for when the characters are just immune to Annihilates, specifically Galactic Legends. Next up is going to be the Standard Dash team. It's a pretty good defensive team. I like Hondo on here. He messes with a lot of the teams that want to be able to go out and go first and just immediately wreck everything, specifically like Bad Batch, Imperial Troopers, Bounty Hunters, who need to go out at the beginning to gain control. If he can stop that from happening, he can sometimes stop the counter entirely. Next up is going to be Night Sisters. Again, fantastic team. You don't have to have Night Sister initiate on here. You can substitute her for Zombie, depending on what you're trying to do. Either way, abusing the dying and reviving mechanism is going to be very important to get the team to do what it wants to do. Special shout out as well as the fact that it can help two-shot Jabba, which for a lot of people trying to climb up and punch up without Galactic Legends is a very good tool. And overall, it's just a good team to have to punch up against a lot of these A-tier teams, specifically like General Grievous himself. And last but not least, we have our Imperial Troopers who've fallen off a little bit. They haven't aged quite as well as a lot of the other teams have. They've been given help with Gideon, with Dark Trooper, with Piet over the years, but still are out there. They pretty much have to go before the enemy team to be able to stop them. And with a lot of newer characters out there, specifically like Hondo, who are getting to go first, or Afra, who are getting to go first, really messes them up and keeps them from doing what they want to do. But similar to Afra, also very good at taking down single Galactic Legends, just because there's so much firepower immediately, and if you can't start picking them off, they just ultimately destroy you. Next up is going to be our C tier, and this is where we are going to look at a lot of what I call transitionary teams, and that is teams that you probably shouldn't be aiming to use long term, but they have enough Galactic Legend or other legendary requirements, you're going to end up using them a lot. And this is pretty much where the non-Trench team is going to end up. Typically, again, if we were including Conquest characters, Trench would obviously be the leader here, and it would be a little bit higher up on the tier list. But we don't have Trench, so we're going to have to use Newt lead. And this team also isn't bad. It's going to excel a lot more on offense and or against bad players that don't know to consistently cleanse off the extortion, because especially in 5v5 and even in 3v3, if Nuke can land extortion on everyone and then Dooku can help stun them so they can't cleanse it and get rid of it, it just becomes really fun to watch Newt take about 6 turns to the entire enemy team's one, because of how both his leadership and unique ability work. I love Django and pretty much every Separatist squad because instant contract is hilarious and also very useful. And then Wat Tambor, while this probably isn't the best place for him, it still is a place for him because he has the Separatist synergy and they all synergize with him as well. Next up is going to be, I guess, our secondary Jedi team. Again, this might not be the way that you want to split Jedi overall, but if we're assuming the best Jedi Knight Revan team like we did before, this is kind of what we're left with. And quite frankly, this isn't that bad. Bastila with a tank, Bears for healing, Grandmaster Yoda for some good damage, and then Ayla Sakura for either control or more damage. It's overall a pretty good team. You're not going to be punching up and beating a lot of the A-tier squads with it, or probably any of them at all, but still it's something that you can use to great effect, or maybe just throw it on defense and hope that the opponent isn't able to throw nest at it. Next up is going to be Sorty's team, which is essentially just requirement galore. Every single character in here is required for something, so it's a team that you kind of passively work your way into. The only issue between T3 and 4 is kind of probably going to be stuck at gear 11 or gear 12, but again, for transitionary teams, that's fine. They're just there until we get a better team worked up, and hopefully making sure that your opponent isn't just getting straight 65s on your defense. Geonosians are here. They would be a lot higher up if this were for TW and they had Paul Omicron, but it isn't for TW, it's for GAC, so this is just kind of where they land. Again, a very good transitionary team. You get them to get Watt. Overall, they have some fun defensive viability in the beginning of the game, specifically because of a Geonosian Brood Alpha's leadership ability, which gives flat health and protection bonuses, which again, before you start to get to relics is actually really OP. After you get to relics and your percentages start being a lot higher, the flat number isn't overall as valuable. Sana as well, a lot of requirement overlap here, some really fun things you can do if you mod them correctly with the right Zetas to where you get tenacity down, ability block in days. It's really fun to watch people Wampa fail against it. Every once in a while it does happen when Wampa can't line up the cleanse right. Next up we have the Final Order team, which is essentially just what you would have if you don't have SLKR yet. This is kind of the best combo to make, assuming that we have crew in the other team. And I realize we repeated Kylo here, so maybe substitute him with just a random Executioner is actually really good in this comp. Him coming in and assisting with his base, he does a ton of damage. Next up is going to be the Mon Mothma team that has really struggled in the recent game. We actually just made a video talking about teams that age poorly, and Mon Mothma unfortunately fit really well into that because she used to do so many things, especially from a PvE perspective, but also on the PvP side, and has really fallen out of favor due to very specific counters like Iden and Wampa. They might not even have another dedicated target, so they could just be used and to really great effect because they typically get very high banners, but it can still be a great cleanup team specifically for Galactic Legends. We talked about that in the case of Troopers, and Mon Mothma is actually better than Troopers depending on what you're trying to counter. I know Jabba specifically in 3v3 they actually have his number quite well if you use Cassian there. Next up is going to be this team, which is essentially, you asked me, Calvin, why in the world did you make this team? Well, this is the team that a lot of people end up with when they're going for Jabba but don't quite have Jabba, so that can be fun and good to use. Next up is going to be our Ewok team. Standard, you can use it, it's fine. Wookiee, very similar, where they have good synergy, but they just don't have either the stats or the immunities or the overall survivability to tank it up there with a lot of these stronger teams. Although again, transitionary teams are still good teams. You have to fill the board with something. We can't all just magically flip out the MasterCard and have the best 20 teams in the entire game. Definitely still have their place. And in last and very least spot is going to be the D tier teams that just quite frankly, man, if you could just not use these teams, that would be great. I mean, the Jawas, I mean, if you had them at Relic for whatever reason, again, we talked about them, there was a point where they were actually fairly useful. That's fine, but they sometimes win on offense, and it's really funny when they do. When they lose, it's really sad, and even when they win, it's not typically for good banners. This Rey squad is unfortunately what you get when you build the good Finn Zord team, and I really wouldn't sacrifice that in any way, shape, or form. Make that team. Deal with this, use it if you have to. Phasma, we kind of talked about. This is already kind of just age poorly because you're essentially just putting together all of your leftover first order requirements. And it's even okay to make a secondary first order team outside of SLKR. It just probably shouldn't be this one specifically. And also the leftover scoundrels up top, which again, I said this in the last time I made this video. This kind of makes it feel like we did Queel and IG-11 here dirty. But realistically, if you are building all the other teams with Dash and kind of the superior characters like L3 and like Vandor, this is just kind of what you're left with. And Kira's lead is probably the best one out there right now for Scoundrels after we assume we've already, slotted in Bam and Dash and everyone else. So that is going to be the video. Thank you guys for watching. Let me know what you think from this format. I don't think I'll be doing this regularly, but if it would be helpful, that'd be awesome to know. Until the next time, stay awesome.